In this video, I'm going to show you how to make homemade Sculptamold for about 1/3 of the price and much quicker than a lot of the other alternative methods that are out there. Now we are going to be using the same materials that other people have shown how to make this, but I've got a unique little twist that makes it quicker and for my liking almost as good as the real thing. Of course, the main materials that we're going to be using here are some casting plaster. You could just use some cheap plaster of Paris. This was the cheapest I could find on Amazon. And we're going to be using the classic toilet tissue or toilet paper, whatever you want to call it. I actually held off making this video because of course of the world situation right now. I didn't really want people buying this just to make homemade Sculptamold when other people needed it for other reasons, but that, thankfully, the panic buying situation seems to be over. The normal way in which homemade Sculptamold is made is generally as follows. They will take this, they will try to blend it up, mix it with water to try and get it into a fine pulp, and then they will dry it. Now that takes a long time, and a bit of me was wondering if we can shortcut that and simply tear it into pieces and make it that way. The answer is yes, but there's a little important differential, and I'm going to show you that in a moment, and I'm also going to compare it to actual Sculptamold. So let's crack on and I'll show you how I make mine. So I'm going to show you the wrong way and the right way of making your quick homemade Sculptamold, and then what I'll do is I'll compare the right way against actual Sculptamold. Now we start off with our same ingredients for both, which in this case is just casting plaster. I'm not going to measure the exact quantities, but trust me, I'm going to try my best to do as equal as possible. Now, the trick to this is that it's the order of operations. For both of them, obviously it is still plaster, and it's going to be toilet roll, tissue paper. So what I'm going to do is just cut some of this up into little fine chunks. It's completely okay to simply just tear this into small chunks. Obviously, technically the smaller, the finer, the better, but I'm going to deliberately leave it in slightly thicker chunks, literally just a couple of minutes. Okay, I think you'll agree with me that that is not exactly like finely chopped tissue paper. It is literally just scrunched up the best I could do it and just torn into little shreds like that. And the important thing, as I said, is the order of operations. So the first thing we're going to do is the one where it is incorrect, and what we're going to do is simply just put in our paper. Now the worst thing you could do here would be to just add water. So what I'm going to do is actually mix this together a little bit. It's not mixed perfectly, but I'll add the water and I'll show you what I mean. Now, how much water is completely up to your opinion. I'm not going here with any measurements. The recommendation for Sculptamold is cottage cheese. So that's essentially what we're going to go with here. It's a bit wet, obviously, because it's all paper and plaster. So I'm just going to squeeze out some of the liquid because I don't really think it's going to do us any good. Pile it up against the side, and I'm also going to try and flatten it a little bit. So the liquid here is popping out. I've actually got some on my knee, which you can't see, but so I think you can see the texture here, can't you? Yep. I think so as well. Keep in mind, we're literally using a spoonful of plaster out of a big giant tub. But yeah, so what I'm going to do is take my finger. Now I'm going to wait a little bit before I come back to this, but for now, take a bit of water, just try and smooth it out. Now, the minute I try and smooth it out, I'm just smudging it around, like it's just disintegrating on me. Basically, there's no real way at the moment I can get that smoother. So what I will do, make sure it's attached to this wall, what I will do is just wait a minute and we'll see if we can smooth it anymore. It's been a couple of minutes, there's still a lot of moisture in it, but I'll wet my fingers and we'll just see if we can smooth it. I can't smooth it. You can see the little bits are coming up. But the whole point is that it's a little bit more rough than perhaps it should be. Now I'll show you the other method. Right, for me, the simple trick is this. We are going to mix the plaster and the water together first. We will just mix our plaster together like normal. This is just normal plaster of Paris. I'm just going to mix it. The whole reason behind this is that we want to make sure that the tissue paper is soaked with this plaster mix. Whereas when you add them together and it's separated, what is actually happening is that you're filling the tissue paper with water and then the plaster is casting, and they're not necessarily together. Whereas if you mix the plaster first, then it's essentially like a fancier paper mache. I'm going to go a little bit thinner than I possibly normally would with plaster, simply because I'm going to basically thicken it up with the tissue paper. This one is perhaps a bit more of a finer process, so I'm going to just add it. I'm not going to add everything first, and then I'm essentially going to soak our mixture in this. Now, you'll notice I didn't chop up the tissue into like really thin bits or anything like that. This is the same size as we already had. What we've got to do though is make sure we cover it all in plaster. Now it is possible here that perhaps in the first set I actually used too much tissue paper, because if I'm honest, I don't think this will necessarily take much more tissue paper. So let's, I'm just going to mix it with my hand. There's not as much liquid to squeeze out because the plaster was already like the right consistency basically. But there we have it, we have a little ball. As I said, it's not as much. So in this method, I do think perhaps maybe on the original test piece that I did too much toilet roll. But either way, it's just an example. Right, okay, so we'll go with that. And yeah, I'll do the same test. Obviously, I'm not going to possibly go up as high here because I don't think I have quite as much actual material to work with. Get a little bit of water on my hands. And you'll see this time, I don't know if you can actually see that properly, but I can properly smooth it. Like, it just smooths instantly, right? Can you see that? Can you literally see the difference? But yeah, like, look at the smoothness of that. Beautiful. I'll go back to the old one, but you saw me, I tried that straight away and it didn't work on the original. And yeah, no, I'm pulling at the tissue basically. It's in chunks. Whereas the new technique, this new style of the order in which you do it, really, really allows you to smooth it. It's an incredible difference. We're moving on to Sculptamold then, and I'm going to go try and get a smooth consistency. So I might add a bit more water than you normally would, but we'll see. I'm going to try and get a similar amount. Now, I'm not 100% sure how much I should really use to get the same kind of quantities that we did on the other bit, but I think I'm happy with that. We'll see what happens when I add the water. We're going to go for the classic cottage cheese. Now, I have used this before, and I knew it was going to shrink. Obviously, it's using like... because there's like paper stuff in there, we know it's going to essentially shrink. Now I do apologise if you can hear my new baby daughter in the background. Let's add this water. I will stir that with my classic here. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to get much better than that, so let's whack that on. Oh yeah, I definitely used too much there. Didn't weigh it either. But yeah, much more of this. In fact, I'm actually, just to be at least reasonable in terms of comparison, I'm going to take a bit off. Now I know with this you can get it smooth, you can get it pretty damn smooth. Now I have used more than what I did for the plaster examples. That's just my fault, but I'm gonna wet my fingers actually, rather than pour the water on it. Just because I know this one, it likes water more. So you can see in this case, instead of it like tearing apart, it is actually pretty damn smooth. Now, I don't think I've done the best job of mixing this, so I'm not going to claim that this wouldn't go as smooth as my version, because I'm pretty sure it would. It's pretty damn smooth on its own there. I've just, if I'm honest, made too much of it. But I will try and get it smooth by just putting on water. In fact, I'm just going to pour on water. Let's just do it. That will smooth this out quite a lot. I'm struggling to get it like pristinely flat, sure, but I think that's probably me rather than the Sculptamold. But yeah, it's smooth enough, isn't it? Like, as you can see, it's not quite perhaps as smooth as the one I did, but it is what it is. Yeah, once the Sculptamold has settled a little bit, it does actually smooth out pretty nicely. So there you are. I think the most important thing here is that it's actually the order in which you do things. If you mix up your plaster of Paris first, or your casting plaster first, then you put your toilet tissue in, you're afforded the luxury of doing larger chunks, because essentially you're making a much nicer paper mache, and the casting plaster will soak into the toilet tissue. Now for my money, this is much quicker than blending it and putting it in water and trying to make it into a fine pulp, but you could still do that if you wanted to make large quantities of it. But for me, just having this at hand and some casting plaster, pretty much have the equivalent of Sculptamold. By the way, Sculptamold is fantastic, but I'm just wondering if there's any need for me to ever buy this again. If I'm going to use stuff that's not visible, or I don't need fine work, then I'm just going to use the toilet tissue method. I will only ever need this if I need high quality stuff. And even then, I sort of feel like the home method might just be enough. And the whole method is basically 1/3 the price. You can get 1 kilogram of plaster for about 1/3 of the price of 1 kilogram of Sculptamold, and the results are very similar. If you do try this out and you do make some stuff, whether it's for your basing or for your rocks or what have you, do let me know. I'd love to see pictures in the Facebook group. Other than that, I hope you have a most beautiful day. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.